NTV.
Is brought to you by
ITEL Mobile. Enjoy better life.
Welcome back and many thanks for staying with us. This year's Human Rights Day theme relates to the COVID-19 pandemic and focuses on the need to build back better by ensuring human rights are central to the recovery efforts. Religion has been a key factor affecting politics in Uganda, right from religious wars that divided the country along religious lines. The politics of Uganda have continued to be determined by religion despite the fact that Uganda is a secular country. Now, the big question actually remain, many of them. But then ahead of Human Rights Day, which is tomorrow, the 10th of December, the year 2020, it's going to be a Thursday, we have two social justice warriors in the studio to speak to us about this and more. I do have Angela Nabwowe. She's the Programs Director at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. She's not alone. She's also joined by Omar Nyazi, the President, Muslim Center for Justice and Law. Both gentlemen and lady join me right now in studio. A very good morning, Angela and Omar.
Good morning, and
all right.
Thank you for having us.
Let me start with you, Angela, from the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. Let's talk about what this day means to you as a social justice advocate.
Thank you. Human Rights Day 2020 is unique, and it is a time of reflection, especially because of the COVID pandemic. When you look at what has happened in the country, there's been a lot of disruptions, and these disruptions speak to social and economic rights. When we talk about socio-economic rights, there's a time I was at home and my daughter was telling me, "Mommy, those things you call social and economic rights, they are basic needs of man." We were taught at school that these are basic needs of man. Indeed. Because you're talking about water, you're talking about basic shelter, you're talking about health. These are basic needs of man. So when the pandemic broke out...
So the young one couldn't understand why you were making so much noise about things that should have been the basics of life.
Yes. So these are basics of life, and we have seen COVID do a lot of damage. And we have seen that many people who are able to provide for themselves were not able to do so because of the pandemic. So that is why when we look at Human Rights Day 2020, 72 years after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted.
1948.
1948. It really speaks to the situation today, and we should be able to learn something from it, especially when you look at the theme, Recover Better. So we feel that this year is special, and we should be able to put the spotlight on economic and social rights, which are the basic needs of man, because we also know that when this pandemic started, we saw a rush for people going to buy food, to stock it in big quantities. We saw pronouncements from government saying water should not be disconnected. So, but from our point of view is that we shouldn't only be looking at pandemics. These are things that we should be able to enjoy as human beings without even the pandemic. So when we have a chance now, because sometimes it is things like COVID, pandemics, that help us actually plan better for the future. How do we make sure that the systems we build are resilient, such that when such things occur, we are able to come out strong, and we are not going into panic mode. So I think this is special for us, and it gives us an opportunity as a country to focus more on these rights. We are not saying that the other rights are not important. They are equally important, but we also know it that in this country, socioeconomic rights, when you talk about education, when you talk about health, when you talk about water and sanitation, when you talk about social security, we are seeing a wave where such things are being left to the private sector, where the private sector is taking over, and COVID has showed us that we cannot rely on the private sector.
All right, that is Angela Nabwowe, the Programs Director at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. Later on during this interview, we shall disrupt the proceedings and then go to Ali Mivule, who is following the presidential candidate, Robert Chiglani, and his campaign trail. So please don't get caught unaware. But then let's continue with this conversation on human rights. Well, I'm getting information that we can go now to Ali Mivule, who is actually following the presidential candidate, Robert Chiglani. Ali, a very good morning. What's the latest where you are?
Yes, a very good morning to you, Romeo Usiku, and we're coming to you live from Koboko District Way, which was the second stopover of the National Unity Platform presidential candidate Robert Chiglani, where he had a well-attended rally here. Yesterday, Robert Chiglani was traversing the districts of Maracha, Koboko, as well as Yumbe, and again opening up a National Unity Platform office in Yumbe district with a mammoth crowd there attending all the rallies for yesterday. But again here in Koboko, the talk of the town is about Chiglani's endorsing the NRM flag bearer. That's Charles Ayume, Dr. Charles Ayume. Dr. Charles Ayume is the one who beat the incumbent Evelyn Anite in the NRM primaries, and he's awaiting to stand against Yakan, who is an independent. But again now from Maracha, that's where Chiglani started endorsing several other non-NUP party members. The first one was Oguzuli of the FDC, as well as the independent Achidri. And then coming here in Koboko, that's where Robert Chiglani announced that people of Koboko should actually support Dr. Charles Ayume, and people were actually very, very happy. Most of the people that attended that rally, and some that we talked to were like, now this is political maturity from our side of the National Unity Platform, saying that predominantly, for those of you that know the geography here and the politics here, is that here NRM is predominant. And many people now we are saying that after ticking Dr. Charles Ayume, then we shall be also ticking Robert Chiglani. So we await, but there are some questions that here. Was it part of the strategy? Was it a populist move? Or was it a weakness on the side of the National Unity Platform? But your guess is as good as mine. So today we're going to be heading to the districts of Obonji, we shall be going to Moyo, and lastly it will be Chiglani. And again, the message here, Chiglani was saying that he has no beef with any other candidate or any other person that is outside the National Unity Platform. But for him, the clear message was that they need change. And he actually said he needs people like Dr. Ayume, who is also a youth, to come up and make these changes. And he said this is not a campaign, these are not elections, but a revolution. So, as I've told you, we shall be moving to the neighboring districts here in Moyo, Obonji, and Chiglani. Unless you have any other questions, Romeo Usiku, I come back to you in studio.
My brother, have you noticed any processions within that jurisdiction? Because we noticed so many processions from NRM supporters. Are you still seeing processions allied to the National Unity Platform presidential candidate?
As of this morning, I haven't seen any.
Today. Ali Mifule, thank you very much for that update. Well, that's it. He's actually following the presidential campaign trail of Robert Chiglani in that regard. We did notice selective application of the law. NRM people can hold processions, but then when it comes to the opposition, they are met with the full force of the law. Ahead of Human Rights Day on the 10th of December, that is Thursday tomorrow, why not unpack such inconsistencies within the law? Umar, what do you have to tell me about this? We've seen presidential candidates being stopped in their tracks not to go ahead with their official campaign trails. This is an egregious human rights violation of the law. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I do agree that access to information for voters is crucial for any electoral process. That an election is not just casting a vote, but before I cast my vote, I have to get information from the person that I'm handing over power to. Because in an electoral process, we are handing over our power to those that we are electing into power to determine our future. Therefore, the state should put in place mechanisms where all presidential candidates, all parliamentary candidates can extend their information to the people, to the electorate. Therefore, stopping someone from campaigning is really deplorable because it goes at the core of an election. Yes, we do understand the COVID-19 issues, the scientific campaigns and all that, but all these were not planned. You look at the number of districts that we have, how many presidential candidates do we have, what is the cost of airtime on media, and all that. We should put all these factors into consideration. All that the presidential candidates want to pass on is information to their electorate, and it's the role of the state to give them mechanisms through which they can pass over the information such that people can make informed decisions about who to vote.
So in a nutshell, when you stop Robert Chiglani or Patrick Amuria to board, you're not only violating his constitutional rights, but even me as a voter, you're violating my right to information.
Yes, actually, my focus is not on Chiglani,
But the voter.
but the voter, because it is the right to vote, and it's the voter who's going to give away his power to Chiglani or power.
So to what extent should religious leaders intervene in politics or the election?
Actually, this should be their preoccupation. This should be a preoccupation of religious leaders, because elections affect all of us. First of all, religious leaders are in the domain of voters, and they interact with the electorate on a daily basis.
All right, Uma, let's also get updates on the presidential trail of another presidential candidate, that is the incumbent Mr. Tubu Haburwa. And we do have our reporter, Habad Ziwa, who is hot on his campaign trail. A very good morning, Mr. Ziwa. What's the latest where you are?
Good morning, viewers, and wherever you're watching from. We are still here in Mbarara. After finishing Greater Bushenyi yesterday, the NRM candidate Yoweri Museveni today heads to Ntungamo to meet the NRM leaders from Ntungamo, Rwampara and Rukunjiri districts. It is in Ntungamo where Chamate Primary School, lately the president has been talking about Chamate and Chamate Primary School. This is where Museveni and his wife Janet went for their primary education. It is also in Ntungamo where you find Ruhama constituency, which was once represented by Janet Kataha Museveni in Parliament, who is also the Minister for Education. It is also in Ntungamo municipality where you have now ANT, Member of Parliament, who was formerly independent, Gerard Karuhanga. It is the only constituency that is in the hands of the opposition, and the rest of the constituencies are represented by the NRM. It is also in Ntungamo where Major General Mugisha Muntu, the presidential candidate for Alliance for National Transformation, hails from. It is where he grew up from, and it is where his home and family is. So Ntungamo has a lot of historical attachment to the movement, and if you look at the 2016 elections, still the movement won this district by higher margins. We wait to see what will happen in Ntungamo, but according to the president's program, so far we have tomorrow and Friday will be resting days, but any time anything can change. We wait to see what will happen tomorrow and Friday, whether some adjustments will be made. So far, I would say the campaigns are going on so well without any skirmishes whatsoever. There is a total observance of the COVID-19 guidelines where the president is. In Bushenyi yesterday, you had statements from the Minister of East African Affairs, Major General Kaindo Tafire, saying that for them, they didn't go to fight in Ruwero to hand over power to Chiglani, because for them, Chiglani does not have clear policies for Uganda. He's irritated, and according to Tafire specifically, he said there are people with ill motives who are behind Robert Chiglani. But these statements cannot be confirmed, cannot be confirmed as I've said, because he said them by himself. So that is the situation, and back to Romeo in the studios.
Abad Ziwa, I do have only one question for you. Yes, where you are. We've noticed that members that are loyal to President Yoweri Museveni have been holding processions. That is, music promoter Balam and his other supporters of the NRM have been holding processions supporting the NRM candidate, that is President Yoweri Museveni. Have you gotten any pronouncements from members of the police or other security apparatus on the same issue where you are?
Not any, but yesterday when we were in Bushenyi, one of the commanders of police tried to stop a procession of border cyclists and music promoter Baram. But there was an exchange between Baram and him, until when Baram grabbed a microphone and spoke loudly and told the cyclists not to mind the police officer and continue doing what they were doing. And the police officer, I think, was powerless and backed off. But that is, according to the NRM Secretariat, a program that is outside their mandate, and it is the responsibility of security agencies to take charge. So if you ask the Secretariat, they will tell you our official program is where the president is, and this is where SOPs are strictly adhered to. Anything that happens outside the meeting venue is in the hands of the security agencies. So that is the position of the party. And I think it's the security agencies to take charge.
Thank you very much, Herbert Ziwa, and we shall get back to you for more information on the president's campaign trail. I do have Angela Nabwowe. She's still here in studio with me alongside Mr. Umar, the president, right there. And we are still unpacking the issue of the Human Rights Day that is going to be taking center stage tomorrow. So let's talk about social protection, Angela. During the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw so many issues of food distribution and so forth, but then people were saying government should have done more. We are also hearing there's a right to, choice of food. If government is giving me posho and I want rice, the variations in how people actually trying to understand how the law works. But then help us understand, has government put in place enough social protection interventions to help Ugandans during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay, thank you, Romeo. I think when you look at the theme of human rights, they recover better. When you talk about social protection, you're looking at a wide range of measures, policies, interventions that are covering the vulnerabilities that people, the risks and vulnerabilities of people, either. And why this discussion is important is that we shouldn't limit it actually to the pandemic. We should be looking at these interventions being long-term, not short-term. They should be longer-term interventions. But to have that discussion better, I think it is important to go back to the budget, our budget as a country. When you look at the budget for the financial year 2020-21, because this budget was approved after the pandemic had already started. So when you look at that budget and you look at how people who are in charge are behaving, you see that we have not learned a lesson from COVID in terms of social protection. So in the 2020-2021 financial year budget, government, a parliament which does appropriation went ahead and allocated 41.5% of the budget to security, infrastructure, and debt repayment. And out of that, you see that infrastructure is taking 19.6%. You see security taking 9.5%, and then you see interest and external debt repayment taking 11.9%. But when it came to social protection, only 0.4% was allocated. And you ask questions, are we learning? And then also when you look at the coverage of social protection in a country, you see that it is only at 3%. But from our statistics, we have 9.3 million people who are in need of safety nets. And even going further from that, if we are to compare with our peers in terms, for instance, cash transfers as a means of as one of the social protection interventions, the direct cash transfers, you see that Uganda is at 0.14, but when you look at Kenya, they're at 0.4, and Rwanda is 0.3. We are not comparing with the UK or Sweden, we are comparing with our peers in the region. So you see that there is not much attention that is being put to such things, and yet when you talk about social protection, you're putting in place measures, because I also know, being Ugandan, you know what happened during COVID. You know that when there are situations of pandemics, there are people who are ordinarily able to provide for themselves, but because of what happened in terms of loss of jobs, by May, 600,000 people had lost jobs. And a number of companies had also closed. So these people would ordinarily provide for themselves, but they are not able to. But then there are also vulnerabilities because of age, because of disability. So also in terms of recovering, in light with Human Rights Day, how do we recover better? There are measures that government put in place to be able to provide for companies to come back. And when you look at those figures, out of the money that was provided, the 1.2 trillion, you saw that informal sector, which employs 68% of the population, only got 7%. And also when you look at the money that went to Microfinance Support Center, that is supposed to be able to help the low-income earners, out of that 94 billion, we got a report from the Microfinance Center as of 2nd December that 3.8 million people had applied for that money. But when you do simple mathematics, if everyone was to get that money out of the people who applied, one would be getting 24 shillings. So what does that tell you about the seriousness with which government is taking this, because people have to remember that social protection is a right. This is not privilege, it is a right, because it is about people living in dignity, people to be able to afford basic needs of life. So when we look at social protection interventions, we shouldn't just be looking at short-term things, because you talk about food distribution, that was only for a short period of time, but are now people able to provide for themselves?
So food distribution should have continued.
It should have continued for those people who are vulnerable, who are not able to meet, because food is a right. You can't take that away from us. So, and government, what we also have to understand is that government has the ultimate responsibility when it comes to to rents. Government has a responsibility to protect, to respect, and to fulfill these rights. So we should be able to hold our government accountable. And one of the things we have to remember is that when we talk about these services, government is required to put the maximum available resources available towards these things. And that includes looking at how the money is being allocated, what is it being allocated for, what is it actually doing, and who is it benefiting. Because if I'm telling you that social protection is taking just 0.4% of the national budget, and you have 41.5 going into infrastructure and security, I think that speaks volumes. We should be able to learn, because some of the countries that have progressed in terms of these rights, they did so actually, most of them, when you look at UK, it was after disasters. It was after the World War that they had to make sure, for instance, when you look at housing, housing has been largely left to the private sector. But we know that government has a role to play. They have to put in place interventions for those people who are not able.
And it's like you're saying, COVID-19 hasn't been a wake-up call for this government.
Not yet, but as a right. So that is why we are using these avenues, Human Rights Day, as an opportunity to be able to shed more light on this, because also the understanding is that many people do not understand their basic rights. So we use these avenues to be able to speak about these issues.
And we should. And Mr. Omar Nyanzi, yes, away from the issue of ineffective social protection interventions, what are some of the other failures that were exposed and exploited by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you very much. She has talked about the issue of food and food distribution moving on. But for me, I would think that what we demand from the government is creating a conducive environment through which people can work and earn. Ugandans are not beggars. Ugandans have all along struggled to get food, to educate their children, and do their things. So what we need is a conducive environment. Because when it comes to issues of provision of food, you saw the scandals which come with every procurement that the government makes. You saw what happens to radios. You saw what happened to Posho. You saw what happens to all the COVID procurements that have been made. It turns into a bonanza, a cash bonanza for people to get money. Therefore, I would think that the government should use its mechanisms to create an environment. What traders need is to talk about the issue of interest rates that they get from the banks. The government has a hand to say that we are setting the bank rate at 4%, such that people can get quick loans. The government has control over the big landlords to waive rent for their tenants. Because right now the government can only do lip service. Landlords, you negotiate with tenants. But we need that arm that people, rent during COVID has been waived, and the government has a plan for landlords. I think that is what we need from the government. Because food distribution cannot be sustainable. Apart from the scandals that we have of money being taken, people need to work. People need to provide for themselves. You've talked about the right to choice of food. You would have seen the food which was distributed. I had an opportunity of looking at it. It was terrible. Therefore, I would think that we should not depend on handouts from government, but the government should create a conducive environment. We should have a COVID-19 recovery plan. In the government, we should have in National Planning Authority, we should have a committee dedicated to COVID-19 recovery.
All right.
Yeah.
Umar Nyazi, the president of the Uganda Muslim Center for Justice and Law. He was not alone. We also did have Angela Nabwowe Kasule. She is the programs director at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. Many thanks, both of you, for having made the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, you're still watching Morning at NTV. Let's take a very short breather. We'll be right back with more information. Keep it here.
Buy the